So I'm pleased to be here today, and I'm really honored to moderate such a panel, and I'd like to ask the panelists to come up at this time. So the purpose of today is to ask some tough questions and to really advance the dialogue between business and education and partnership to really talk about how we can work together to grow more to grow our workforce in STEM and to add to that rich diversity and to really what we call confront the new American dilemma. So we have a panel here today, a very esteemed panel and I will introduce, starting on my far right, is Nata Abbott from GE Healthcare, Cassandra Alston-Childs from Johnson Controls, Lauren Baker, Milwaukee Teachers Education Association, Fred Berry, Milwaukee School of Engineering, Tina Flood, Milwaukee Public Schools, John Greene, Johnson Controls, and Reggie Layton from Johnson Controls. So let's ask some questions of the panel here and start with, I'd like to start with Cassandra. As a business matter, the issue that we'll simply not have enough engineers to meet the demand of the United States companies, and unless we triple that number of underrepresented minorities that become engineers, our way of life and America's ability to compete on a global scale will be at risk. How do you respond to that?
I thought we were going to start with the easy question.
There are no easy questions here.
So let's start with the obvious. The obvious is, we just heard from Dr. Irving all the statistics of why this is a crisis and why this is something that needs to be addressed. But at the same time, we're all here in this room because it is an issue and there hasn't been as much progress as we need as a country, right? So if we have a crisis, but we don't have enough action, then it's not a crisis, right? Then it's just an issue. And so that's the obvious, right? It's an issue. And so how do we bring it to the point where it becomes a crisis for more people who can take action in addition to the people outside of this room, because we get it, right? But how do we make sure that more people get it? And for me, an example could be what we learned from global warming, right? We've been hearing about global warming for years and years and years, but until the issue gets put in the context of what the actual impact is of the statistics, and then a visual of what that looks like before we can actually take action, right? So a lot of you seen the data and information that they would share. I remember seeing a map of global warming and how the temperature is rising of the world by 2 degrees, and I'm an engineer. 2 degrees is round off, right? Why should I care about 2 degrees? But what did they do with that? They said, well, 2 degrees may not mean a lot to you, especially here in Wisconsin, right? 18 degrees versus 16, we don't care, it's still cold. So what does that mean to the world? But what they did is they gave us visuals and they gave us examples of why that should matter to me. You started seeing pictures of glaciers, falling off the coast of the Antarctic, and you started seeing animals that weren't gonna make it. And honeybees extinction, right? So those are the things that really got to the point where it became a household thing and something that the general population can relate to. So I think for us as STEM advocates, we've got to find what our falling glaciers are for the rest of the organization the rest of the population to understand the issue and to move it along the continuum from just an issue to a crisis.
So make it visible. Wonderful. John, the Bureau of Labor Statistics projects that we're going to need about 178,000 engineers in the next decade. So what intervention strategies do you suggest are you currently providing to help close that gap?
Well, every time I hear this response to a question like that, I always think it's a little off the cuff, but I'm not being off the cuff. When I say at Johnson Controls, one of the things we're doing is we're creating a growing and sustainable organization that's going to be around in 10 years, and we're going to need those engineers. So for everybody that's thinking about a STEM career, you need to understand today, all of the young folks out here, we're in the process of making space for you in our organization. So that's the first thing. We've got 10,000 engineers in our organization right now. And we know that over the next decade, our growth plan suggests that we're going to need many more engineers than that. And so we're providing our active workforce right now with opportunities for growth, for the ability to acquire global perspective, the ability to participate in our innovation initiatives around the country, the ability to work outside of the United States and to contribute to the growth of our organization. Our current engineering bases also are participating in formal and informal partnerships with universities and through mentoring, et cetera, with college students and high school students. We participate in a robotics competition here. You know, over the past 5 years, about 1,000 interns in the United States have been through our, 1,000 engineering interns have been through our doors. And so we're very much involved in making sure that we're supporting and continue to support the development of engineers and technical traits in our organization. Then from my workforce diversity hat, we've looked at our partnerships with organizations that develop and encourage the recruiting of talent. NACME and NSBE and SWE and SHIP, some of the, because let's face it, there are 178,000 engineers that can be imported or that can be found. But those organizations are really focused on making sure that diverse and underrepresented populations are actually recruited and can find careers in our organization. So we really double down on our commitments specific to engineering. I mean, we're an engineering company. And so in terms of where we focus our attention and our resources, not so much in the MBA, in some of the MBA relationships, but much more in terms of thinking about creating partnerships with those organizations from an engineering perspective. Finally, I'd say that one of the other things that I'm really proud that Johnson-Controls is doing as we're moving forward is we're really getting our business resource groups, our diverse groups internal to the organization, to partner, with chapters of those organizations at universities to really make sure that we're working and engaging with engineering students who are in school right now. And that certainly helps us from an attraction perspective. But it also, we think, helps the students not abandon the profession. And there is a fair amount of abandoning engineering that happens where someone starts off in an engineering curriculum and they leave the engineering curriculum either during school or after graduation, decide they're not interested in engineering. And so through the close quarters, the active mentoring, the active involvement and the development and coaching of those students, we hope that we have more folks that actually pull through and complete their degrees. Mm-hmm. Of all of the people that go in and get engineering and decide to leave, we know that only 20% actually leave the workforce. 80% of those folks actually leave engineering, but they're gainfully employed in other professions. Mm-hmm. To the degree to which we can really make sure that we have as many people who pursue engineering degrees actually able to contribute to our workforce, we think we can really help what NACME is trying to get accomplished.
Thank you. It's great to see Johnson Controls doing its part. Tina, what program efforts are taking place in Milwaukee that have resulted in best or promising practices?
I think what we're starting to see is really the idea of partnerships and events such as this where people are actually coming together to have the tough conversations. We're presented with data, but then the next step is really asking each other, what are we going to do about it? And so I think in the opening remarks, Milwaukee Succeeds was referred to, really bringing diverse groups of people together to strategize and create plans to really start to address the issues that we're facing. So I think collective impact is really important. The conversations between organizations that really say, you know what, we can't really focus on our own organization anymore and sort of be self-contained in a box, but we have to say, how can we work together? So when I think about some of the work that we've been doing with our Career and College Readiness Department, some of the partnerships that we have with the local universities, really having the tough conversations about, students are not coming to us prepared in mathematics. And then we have to say, well, why is that? And then what can we do differently or better within the K-12 system to make sure that what we're doing is aligned to what you're looking for, either at the 2-year community colleges or the 4-year colleges and universities, to make sure that it's aligned and that we're talking back and forth. So really, the idea of partnerships and conversation and then taking action to address those kinds of issues is what I've seen happening more of lately that I think is going to make the biggest difference.
Nata, what does corporate America need to do to ensure that more underrepresented minorities become engineers?
Well, I can't really speak on behalf of the entire corporate America, but I think, and we kind of touched on this earlier, in order for someone to succeed in any particular profession or any field in life, they have to be able to imagine themselves in that space. And from corporate America's standpoint, obviously all major corporations have scholarships and volunteer programs, mentoring programs, partnerships with higher ed institutions, kind of boring things that we're all used to. But in a larger context, if you look at sort of our entertainment field and media field, how many programs on TV are about engineers? Mm-hmm. And in fact, I think the Star Trek Next Generation, by having Geordi LaForge as a chief engineer, did more for promotion of engineering amongst minorities than any program I could think of, right? Mm-hmm. So in many regards, being able to imagine yourself in a space and thinking that it's cool and exciting and interesting is something that's very important. I also think if you look at Silicon Valley, they're doing a lot in promotion of themselves as a cool place to be and cool work environment and interesting people and sort of creative, fun place to be. And the more we can do to communicate, and not just communicate, but really paint a picture of engineering field as interesting, exciting, important, something that anyone with any inclination towards science and engineering would want to see themselves in, the more I think children will be able to see themselves in this space and apply themselves to study. Because studying math and science is hard. It really is. And you need to have a motivation beyond good grades to really get there. So the more we can do that, I think the better off we'll be.
Thank you. It leads to a bigger question. I want to talk about government, and I want to ask President McPhail here, or Dr. Phil, I should say. But President, consider that government. What is the new American, why is it this new American dilemma that you painted this picture of so important to the U.S. government, and what's government's role in addressing the problem?
Well, as I indicated, I mean, we talk a lot in this country about U.S. competitiveness. We talk about the fact that we're losing ground in some areas that relate to STEM. And if, in fact, we're going to, not only recover what we've lost, but also, more importantly, maintain the preeminence of this nation in science and technology, engineering, and math, we have to have the young people prepared to enter the field, and we have to have the supports for research and development and all of the other kinds of issues that come before the government, come before the America Competes Act, come before the need for legislative initiatives that are designed to try to ensure that those gaps are closed and that we have the resilience that we need to maintain a viable technology initiative for this country. There's something else I'm concerned about, and that is, we're a nonprofit at NACME. And the nonprofit sector in STEM education is very, very important, but is often overlooked in terms of federal grants and other opportunities for federal funding. This is something that we at NACME, through our engineering public policy effort, have really been trying to pursue. How can a nonprofit organization like NACME, my colleague Michelle Lazama is in the audience, from JIM, major contributor to graduate education for minorities in STEM. How can all of us in the nonprofit sector benefit from dollars that are flowing in Washington every day in the name of supporting STEM U.S. competitiveness, but enough of those dollars are really not coming to organizations like a NACME or a JIM that really are out there demonstrating outcomes, finding ways to work with students who might be overlooked by some other entities, but nevertheless making a contribution to U.S. competitiveness. So I think that the nonprofit focus, as well as the U.S. competitiveness focus, really provide an impetus for the government to become fully engaged.
So, you talked about NACME policies. What kind of policies would you put in place?
Well, I can tell you, obviously, from my top policy would be that an organization like NACME should be able to compete on an equal level with universities and with others who are going after, for example, NSF funds. Now, NACME just won a nice 3-year, $300,000 NSF grant. But in order to get there, not only did we have to submit a good proposal, which we did, but we had to have a lot of visibility in front of leaders, program officers, and others in NSF to let them know that we existed, number one, and that we had the capability as a small, nonprofit to deliver on the expectations of that grant. I think that facilitating the ability of organizations like NACME to really get in front of some of the federal funding stream is a legislative initiative that I'd like to push. And we have some folks who are working on that as we speak.
So I appreciate that. I appreciate NACME, and it sounds like NACME needs our support. Lauren, in April of 2014, the Supreme Court upheld a Michigan constitutional amendment that bans affirmative action in admissions to state public universities. What are the implications of this to African American, American Indian, and Latino young women and men that are seeking admissions to our nation's public colleges and universities?
Well, the statistics actually tell the story for us. In the, after Michigan voters approved the ban on affirmative action at their public universities before it actually got to the Supreme Court, but after they just approved the ban, the number of black freshmen declined at the two most prominent public universities, even while the proportion of 19-year-olds who were black in the population in Michigan increased. It's a very, very sobering statistic. And everyone may not agree with me on this, but I think that what we saw happen in Michigan does not bode well for the diversity at our higher education institutions. And I think that it certainly, following a question on public policy, I think it certainly bears, I think it certainly bodes a very sort of ominous tone for conversations that need to happen. And I think begs on our young people to see themselves as advocates for the open doors at our universities and the recognition of different populations and the strengths that different populations bring into the mix in higher ed. I'd actually, one of the reasons I have my glasses, which just broke on me, and these pieces of paper in front of me is that if you'll tolerate it, I just want to read a short quote from one of the dissenting opinions at the Supreme Court. This is from Justice Sotomayor. The stark reality is that race still matters. The way to stop discrimination on the basis of race is to speak openly and candidly on the subject of race, and to apply the Constitution with eyes open to the unfortunate effects of centuries of racial discrimination. As members of the judiciary, she's speaking for her colleagues, tasked with intervening to carry out the guarantee of equal protection, we ought not sit back and wish away rather than confront the racial inequality that exists in our society. I thought that was a pretty moving statement for us to think about what it means when our courts are actually saying, no, we are no longer helping to give a hand up to those who have suffered from centuries of discrimination. Now that said, that's Michigan, and not all public universities have done away with their affirmative action. And I think it's very, very important for communities of color to support those universities that have affirmative action programs, and to look for the ways to strengthen and advocate for those.
Yeah, thank you very much. Along that line, Lauren, as well, why are underrepresented minority students, not pursuing math and science courses in the middle and the high schools? We saw those numbers here, and Dr. McPhail had put up, and are there different reasons for boys versus girls, or African American and Latino, and what's that about?
I think Nata was getting at this point a little earlier too. I worked in Milwaukee Public Schools for 10 years, and I worked in the career and technical education area, and we would talk about it a lot. Then when a young person who lives around 11th and Center walks out their door in the morning, and that's a zip code that has a very high concentration of low-income families in our state, okay? When you walk out the door in the morning and you look down the street this way and you look down the street that way, you don't see people getting in their cars to come here to Johnson Controls. You don't know a lot of people in your immediate family who work in some of the more high technology fields, because those fields pay more. You would be living in a different zip code. And so you have this issue where a lot of our young people are not in a world where they're going to get a chance to meet the people, see those folks who act as, your guiding light, who act as that mentor, that person who, you look at them and you're like, that's cool. You're not just a geek. A, you're a geek with a good car. Or you get to have fun, you get to tinker at work, you get to play with stuff. And I think because our young people who are low income do not see those people, and the other piece I'll add to that too is, while Johnson Controls is located here, I'm going to guarantee that a lot of in fact, how many young people are here from Milwaukee Public Schools? Raise your hands. Okay, keep your hands up, keep them up. Mm-hmm. Now, how many of you knew what in this building before? Keep your hands up. You did? That's very cool. You actually knew what was inside this building before you got here today. Oh, yeah, okay, right. I know you did. That's not fair. But my point being that we ride on a bus maybe or in a car next to Johnson Controls and Rockwell Automation and GE's Electric Avenue plant, but unless you know somebody works inside them, you don't have a clue what opportunities there are there. So the need to bring the world of work and some of these exciting STEM fields that have opportunity into our children's world, into our children's classroom, is just a tantamount to helping to break down those walls.
What would you do with this high school senior to get him into an engineering degree?
Well, if you're a high school senior, you want to get into an engineering degree, I can kind of describe some of the stuff that we've done at MSOE. We have something called the Carter Academy. So you can petition to get into that, and it'll be 6 weeks of ALEX, which is a computerized tutoring system for mathematics online during the summer, and it's a 4-week residency experience where you live on campus to get used to the pace. You're taking your chemistry and your physics, and it's completely free if you're accepted, so it doesn't cost anybody anything. But the thing is, you need to get used to the pace. There's 2 things we've found in our research that why we did this. Students, even if they're very well prepared, they can come into a college environment. If you're not used to the pace, it's no longer high school, it's college. You go from a very structured to an unstructured environment relative to your mom and dad. I remember when I was in high school, my mom and dad told me exactly what to do, and I said, yes, ma'am, and no, ma'am, yes or no, sir. I went to college. They called me every day, and I said, yes, ma'am, but they made sure that that's the deal. So many kids get that first failure, not because they're not qualified, but they're not used to the pace. Midterm comes real quick, then all of a sudden you're into a negative spiral. So that's what we try to do at the Carter Academy, is get kids used to the pace. The second thing is, you're going to have to basically have that ability to manage your time. There's so many things you can do in college to get distracted, because again, you go from from a structured to an unstructured relative. Those are the things I think are the 2 things that lead us to the most problem. Most of the kids that are at MSOE, we know they can do the work. Now, we're in there making sure they try to, but that's the thing, is that transitional. So whether you go from high school to a 4-year high school to junior college, high school, to whatever, that's the thing. It's getting used to the pace and getting used to that time management. And that's what we try to do at the Carter Academy. That's the 2 things we see.
Let me go to some personal stories now. Let's talk a little bit about some case studies and examples here. And Reggie, how does your engineering background prepare you for other professions?
Before I answer that question, I want to set the context, particularly for the students and the parents that are in the room. I went to Cleveland public schools, so I was from a public school environment. My guidance counselors said you should take as much math and science as you could, and I liked math and science, so I did. I found out that it prepared me well for being admitted to one of the top engineering schools in Ohio at that time. It was Case Western Reserve University in Cleveland, Ohio. I got my letter in December, and on the letter it had a full scholarship from NACME. So what they're describing is absolutely true. So that being said, what you heard this morning is that engineering is difficult and you have to prepare for it at the high school level, and that's all true. But for me and my colleagues from Collinwood High School, it was 7 of us who went to CASE and received NACME scholarships. The thing that motivated us was engineering teaches you how to think. Engineering teaches you how to solve problems. And what the folks at Case Western said, and later my sponsor, General Electric, said, is if you know how to think and solve problems, you're welcome in corporate America. So the 7 of us, we graduated with our engineering degrees. Some of them went on to be bankers. One person went on to be an attorney. Another person went on to be an IT consultant. And we all have graduate degrees. What we found out was that that was absolutely true. And if we're from a background that's disadvantaged, it's not something that can hold you back because you can solve problems. You can create opportunity for yourself. You can create opportunity for your organization by knowing how math and science play into solving problems. So we found that, all of my colleagues, we found that to be absolutely true. So if you want to do anything, don't get discouraged by how difficult the engineering curriculum could be or how you may wonder if you're prepared. It's worth it because you'll be able to do anything you want in corporate America based on your creativity.
So let me probe a little bit. How did you like science and math to begin with? You know, did you have a role model, a teacher, or parents? Or was it just in your personality something inside you that you just had a love for?
So in Cleveland Public Schools, they had magnet schools at that time. And so Collinwood High School was a magnet school. So I was in a cohort of other folks that were on track to take 4 years of math and 4 years of science. So I was in a group that did it. And then the teachers wanted us to succeed. They exposed us to how math and science turns into a career through science projects and through programs that I found out later were also funded by NACME. For example, Case Western had a program called Case Early Exposure to Engineering, CE Cubed, whereby the faculty members during the summer taught math and science, and then they applied it to experiments that we as high school students got to participate in. So it was always an environment of exposure. That reminds me of something else. After we were, all 7 of us were at Case, and we had received our scholarships and summer internships from our NACME sponsors, right? We met with the HR folks from General Electric, and they were concerned about having engineering graduates, making sure that we stayed in the program. So they said, what can we do to make sure you guys stay in the program? We're giving you scholarships, we're giving you summer internships, you can come back and work every Christmas. What else do we need to do? We said, we need to be exposed to role models, engineers, not just engineers in engineering, because I worked in advanced engineering for incandescent lamp for the National Electrical Lighting Association, which is Neeler Park, where Edison Electric, where the electric incandescent light bulb was invented. But anyway, we said we needed to see role models. And so what the GE folks did every Thursday after work was to bring in an engineer that had done something in engineering and outside of engineering. So we met with the technical marketing people, the attorneys, the manufacturing management folks, the Ed.D. engineering programs. Those were the people who had advanced degrees, the folks who had gone to business school, who were part of their Harvard business program that they promoted. So the NACME sponsor, the corporate sponsor, also showed us that you can use your engineering degree to be successful in engineering, but you could also use your engineering degree to do anything you wanted to do outside of engineering. And all of those students ended up doing engineering or graduating and being professionals.
Exactly. Well, I think we're good for time here in terms of, I think I'll close the panel session here in terms of my asking the questions and doing the probing, and I think teed up some good questions that have given you all insight, I hope, into really the role of education, the role of business, that the roles that we can all play in addressing this challenge in terms of the American dilemma, and getting more underrepresented minority students excited and interested in STEM. And what I also heard was role models are important, exposure is important, and support from parents, support from industry, K through 12, higher ed, all of those components are really important. And it sounds like engineering leads to a good degree is the other part.